Hello everyone, you're listening to the Eiffel Tower podcast. My name is Oliver G. If you're new around here, this is a show all about Paris and France, hosted by me, an Australian guy who's lived in Paris for, well, 5.5 years? Wow. In that time that I've lived in France, I've seen a lot of interesting things, and one of the most memorable sights that I can remember seeing in that time was the Notre Dame Cathedral burning. You probably all saw it wherever you are in the world. You probably all saw it at home, on the TV. Shocking images, flames rising up into the night, the spire collapsing. And thankfully the building remained, although it was heavily damaged. So that night was in April last year. So April 2019, April 15th, if I remember correctly. And this episode you're about to hear is all about Notre Dame. It's a pretty... If I sound a little bit excited, it's because I am. I think this is a pretty good episode. I think you're going to like it. First, you're going to hear a pretty normal length episode with Agnes Poirier, an author who's just written a book about the cathedral. It's called Notre Dame, the Soul of France. I'll talk a bit more about the book and Agnes in a second. But after that bit finishes, you're going to hear from the Monsieur le Maire, the mayor of... I usually call him the mayor of the Marais, but since he was last on this podcast, Monsieur Ariel Weil, he has won an election and he's now the mayor of Paris Centre, which means the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th arrondissements. And I had him on the show a while back talking about the Notre Dame, and then I had him on the show again during the lockdown. And during that episode, I said, hey, do you mind hanging around just a little bit and talking a little bit about the latest on Notre Dame? So you'll hear that. You'll hear him talking about, well, it's not good news really for people who are expecting to get in there again quickly. Here's a quote from him. He said, "It won't be reconstructed in 5 years, that's for sure. There's no way," referring to what President Emmanuel Macron said soon after it was burned down. So there you go. You got 2 interviews in this episode. But let me just talk a little bit about the book and a few other things before we get into it, and indeed the episode too, because there's some fun stuff in there. This was recommended, the topic of Notre Dame, by Kelly Adams, who she wrote in. She's a supporter of the Eiffel Tower on Patreon, and she wrote in and she said she'd visited the Notre Dame in 2018 in spring, and she'd done a sketch of it, obviously with the full spire and the full roof, which are now long gone. And she wrote to me and said she was very curious to hear an update on the cathedral. So as my thanks for your support, Kelly, this one's for you. If you're wondering what Patreon is, consider it like a magazine subscription. You subscribe for a small price every month. You get a bunch of bonus features, and you help make this show better. Patreon.com/The Eiffel Tower. Now, the book that we're going to be talking about, me and Agnes, which I had to learn how to pronounce in a French accent. Agnes. It's kind of like and yes without the D. Agnes. So she's written this book, which I'm reading now. It's called Notre Dame, the Soul of France. And it starts off talking about the night of the fire, and then it moves through the history of the Notre Dame itself, and it goes back, as you'll hear, to that night again at the end of the book. And I chose this book for the Eiffel Tower Book Club. If you don't know what that is, there's a Facebook group that's free to join. There's currently 1,300 people in there, which is crazy, but it shows that a lot of people like books about France, and I chose this very book for the August book. Now, I've almost finished reading it now. When I interviewed Agnes, I'd only just read the first chapter, but I can recommend it. It's really fun. If you're a fan of history, like I am, if you're a fan of the Notre Dame, I'm sure you'll like it. So you can find that on Facebook if you just search the groups on the Eiffel Tower Facebook page. As for the episode, I met Agnes right before I left to Sweden on holiday, which is where I am right now, and we sat in the Saint-Régis Cafe, which is kind of, I could see the Notre Dame from where we were sitting. And you're going to like this. It's one of those episodes where you can hear the sounds of the cafe, the sounds of Paris. An ambulance goes past. You can hear like a French radio off in the distance for a little bit. You can hear the waiters. Typical cafe episode here. And then the bit with Ariel at the end is recorded over Zoom. So that's what you got to come. That's what's the next 35-40 minutes are going to be. And I'll jump back in at the end with a little personal news and maybe read an email or so. But I'll set the scene. We're sitting on the terrace of the Saint-Régis Café. I told Agnes that I was pressing record, and as I pressed record, she sort of looked off in the distance, and there was a Parisian woman in a dress walking in the sunlight, and she commented on that woman, and that's how I'm starting the interview. We'll start with a little bit of Slim and the Beast for the jingle, and then here we go.
I'm just looking at a lovely Parisian.
A lovely Parisian woman?
Yeah, just the silhouette. I like silhouettes.
Well, that's a nice place to start. Agnes, how's my French
Agnes.
Agnes.
Aggie.
You don't
Agnes.
really pronounce the G when you say it in French. Agnes.
Agnes.
Yes. Lovely to meet you.
And you?
And thanks for being on my show as we sit. Well, what is this place? Saint-Régis?
It's a lovely cafe I often go to when I'm in Paris because it's full of tourists, usually. Now it's a bit empty, I must say. So I feel always like on a holiday, like an American in Paris.
Yeah. Why do you love it? Because you feel that you're a tourist yourself when you're here.
Well, yes, because I've lived my life now, half my life in London, the other half in Paris. I was born in Paris, and I love being a foreigner everywhere. I love looking at my compatriots with a foreign eye, and at the British with a French eye, or with a British eye as well, because I feel like one of them now. So I love not being a tourist, but being a stranger. Having the distance.
Yeah.
I like it.
It's kind of a good excuse too. Like you can step back and look in a little bit sometimes. I think I'm the same, But the cafe is interestingly located, considering what we're going to talk about today. From where we're sitting on the terrace. In fact, you guys at home probably just heard that car go past right as we started. But I can see parts of the Notre Dame from here.
And the crane.
Yeah, and the big crane.
The scaffolding.
In fact, someone emailed me the other day to ask if French people name their cranes. Do you know anything about this?
Do they?
I don't know. They said
Perhaps
they
they do. I don't.
No, okay. Well, we won't dwell on that. But before we get to Notre Dame and the whole story there, let's talk a little bit about yourself. You said quickly you're born in Paris. I find that quite rare. I find like a lot of people in Paris come from.
It is true.
Yeah.
It is true. Where? A lot of Parisians are provincials, really, and every Parisian has, a favorite village or they go back to. So it's like Josephine Baker, she's got two loves, her country and Paris. It's the same. I love going back to Brittany, where my grandparents used to live. So, and that's why also during lockdown, a lot of brouhaha was made of Parisians fleeing to the country. Well, they were just going to their second, home.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about second house, but I'm talking about their other France. Yes, but I'm not sure it's so rare. Parisians born. Well, in fact, my parents weren't born in Paris, that's for sure.
Right. Well, which district were you born in?
So I was born in the 12th arrondissement, a very untouristic, very quiet, small bourgeois, leafy, near the Nation Square and east of Bastille.
Right.
And this is where I grew up and lived until I was 23, and then off I went to London.
Right. And hence the British accent that I mistook for being a hint of South African before. Gosh, I could be so wrong with my accent guessing sometimes. But we're just out of interest. You say you got a connection to Brittany. Whereabouts in Brittany?
Saint-Malo.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, and Dinard, yes.
Have you read that book, All the Light We Cannot See?
No.
Oh, yeah, you
Who's
gotta read
it by?
that. Anthony, I can't remember his last name, but I think it's like Dewar or something. And it's about set in the war, and there's a blind girl, and she finds her way around Saint-Malo by touching the walls and stuff like that. It's really good.
Okay.
Highly recommended.
Okay.
Here's me talking about another book when we're going to talk about your book. Everybody should read that book.
Better.
Second to the book we're going to talk about in a second. But maybe just to paint the scene, what do you think of Paris nowadays? I mean, as we're recording this, it's we've been 2 months into this easing of the lockdown, but it's still very quiet. There's not many tourists. Do you like it?
I quite like it. I went yesterday to have dinner in Montmartre. And each time I go to Montmartre, which is probably once every 2 years,
Really?
I think why I'm not going so, more often. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a city within the city, and probably people living in Montmartre never go anywhere else.
I live in Montmartre. I live in...
Really?
Yeah. It's seldom that I go elsewhere.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary place, and it was like being on a holiday.
Why do you only go every 2 years? That's outrageous.
Paris is small, but it's made of villages, and because I also travel quite a lot. So when I'm in Paris, I'm just, on the left bank, and I'm quite busy, and I visit family in the 12th arrondissement. Yeah. But there are, villages like the 16th. I never go to the 16th. But whenever I cycle past, I think this is interesting.
Yeah.
Of course it's very bourgeois, and it's beautiful houses and washed with money, but it's also quite lovely.
Tell me if this is right, I heard that French people say that in the 16th, so everyone, if you're trying to picture it, the 16th is just sort of on the other side of the river from the Eiffel Tower, more or less, Passy and so on.
Passy, exactly.
Someone told me that area is like the new rich people, whereas the 7th is like the old rich.
Well, it depends how far back you go. Yes, the 7th arrondissement is, the ultimate Paris, but it's, again, another world for me. When you walk through the streets, you think that nothing bad happens in the world. It's completely sheltered. You're ensconced in the 7th arrondissement, and nothing bad can ever happen to you.
Right.
No riots in France, no burnt car, nothing.
Yeah.
Why I live in the 5th is different because it's, of course, very comfortable, but it's at the heart of things, and it's the student quarter, and it's never quiet. You see all the demonstrations, you see the riots, students, but that was before I was born.
Yeah.
But still, it's very... you cannot escape what's going on in the world when you live in the 5th. The 12th is another story, as I said. It's very quiet. This is where Lafayette is buried. In that
Picpus, right? Yeah.
In that Picpus cemetery. And Paris is extraordinarily diverse.
What's not to love, right?
Yeah.
I think if I were to move house, I'd be interested in the 5th or the 6th, because I think there's
the 6th is so different from the 5th.
Is it? we could talk about it all day, but we shan't, because I want to talk. I want to talk about Notre Dame.
Yes.
Did they know your name, by the way, when you ordered? I felt like one of the waitresses said your name.
Yes.
That's kind of nice, isn't it?
It is.
Do they know
nice.
your order as well? Can you just say
Yes.
the usual? Comme d'habitude?
They don't even say it. They just bring it to my table.
Oh, that's my dream. Except I keep going to different coffee shops, so I never.
You need to be faithful.
You need to be faithful. It's like a relationship, right?
Almost.
So I'm cheating on all these coffee shops.
Exactly.
I'm learning so much. Okay, so Notre Dame. Let's rewind to before it burnt down. How dear was it to you then?
Well, I think I probably find myself in the same shoes as almost every Parisian or every French person. That is to say, because I live near her, I'm going to say her, and not the cathedral or it.
But you would do that in French, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a she.
Yeah.
La cathédrale. Her beauty, you never take it for granted. You never get accustomed to her massive presence. But also, there's something very benevolent about her. Something that draws you in because you see her from quite far away. Whether you approach her from the east, the west, the north, you see her in the background and you're sort of drawn to her. But not being a practicing, Catholic or any at all religious, I hadn't entered the cathedral in 15 years.
Wow.
And last time I was quite disappointed by, inside the cathedral because, first of all, there are a lot of people there, obviously. It is the most visited cathedral and one of the most visited places in the world. 14 million people. visit it every year. And also there's a lot of shops inside. I mean, shops, selling religious souvenirs, etc. But it felt quite crowded. It felt as if the space had been sort of cluttered, and it deserved to be emptied out in a way, and to leave it to the spiritual activity. So I had been disappointed by what was going on inside, but from the outside, it's an extraordinary place. It's also so multifaceted because it looks different from every angle. It's not like the Eiffel Tower. I love the Eiffel Tower,
sure.
but it doesn't offer you a new face.
That's true. It looks the same from the front and the back, doesn't it?
Yeah.
More or
it's
less.
Quite angular, let's say. Quite metallic and angular. Whereas Notre Dame, everybody has their different view of Notre Dame.
And you mentioned in the book your favourite view was... Which side was your favourite view from? Was it...
From the back garden,
yes.
Almost from here.
Where I'm sitting, if you were to cross that bridge there. Yeah, okay.
But it's been around for almost 1,000 years. So although you don't get used to her beauty, you get used to her presence. And that fire sort of made us realize a lot of people who, again, have not a fibre of religion in them, were incredibly not only moved but upset. But upset to a point that they questioned. They thought, what's going on? Why am I so upset? And also, because I was there, and I had to comment for international media what was going on, and the question was always the same. Agnes, tell us what it represents for France, because we, sitting in Washington, in Sydney, in Rome, feel completely distraught. How come we all feel distraught? And so that's the premise of the book, really. My British publisher said, I'd like you to tell us why, what it represents. So I sort of plunged into her story and discovered those fantastic anecdotes. Some of them I knew, I had completely forgotten about. Some others I completely ignored. And so I understood why we felt the way we did. And it's nothing to do, because it's much more than just a cathedral place of worship for Catholics. It's a place where the French nation often reconciled itself. We are very divided. We're a nation who loves fighting and bickering, and it's a place of unity. And if you remember the Charlie Hebdo attacks, we're talking about staunch secularists. We're talking about the people who were murdered, cartoonists, who really wrote and drew the most appalling things and cartoons against the Catholic Church. So when you think that the day after they were murdered, Notre Dame's bells tolled for those atheists, and it says it all.
How fascinating that is! But how quickly after you're standing there looking at the fire, how soon did you start writing a book about it?
Or
was
not
it in
immediately.
your head straight away?
No, it's just I had already signed my next book with Bloomsbury after Left Bank, so I'm now reprising this. But it was such a trauma, and obviously an unexpected trauma, but also a profound one, which really questioned the whole nation. And I was, one of many of my compatriots, just reeling, trying to recover from what we had seen. And I could see it had touched a nerve, and with everyone around me. I received messages from friends all over the world. And I was contacted by my British publisher saying, actually, I've just looked. I wanted to know more about Notre Dame. I was looking for a short history book. couldn't find any.
Interesting, yeah.
And he said, "Would you like to write it?" And actually, I felt compelled to write it. Although I don't know anything about Gothic architecture, so suddenly I had to plunge myself into the best books on, medieval times and Gothic architecture. It
You're
was
an expert
fascinating. No, I'm not, but I know I'm slightly less ignorant, let's say. I enjoyed the challenge because it gave me 3 months. Was my previous book, took me 3 years.
Wow.
And he said, okay, I want to be able to publish it on the first year, the first anniversary of the fire.
Right.
But of course, lockdown took place. That's another story.
Well, we can touch on it. I've talked to a few authors and myself as well. Like, going through publishing a book that comes out during lockdown isn't easy. How did that? You give me the insight. I'm interested. Did it get pushed back or?
No. Well, okay. So what happened is that I wrote it in 3 months. Then the rights were bought by Flammarion, a French publisher, who said, "Agnes, now we want you to write it in French." So I had 2 months to write it in French.
So you had to do the French version?
Yes.
So you translated yourself?
Well, it's not translation, it's an adaptation, because you don't write about Notre Dame in the same way to a French readership.
How interesting. What do you mean? Like, what? So...
Well, it's... First of all, it's 60 pages longer in French, not because of the language, but because of what I've just said.
Right.
There are certain episodes in history which you need to tell more, simply because there are things about French history that will not be of any interest to the British or the Americans, but will, however, be deeply fascinating for the French. So there are things you need to develop and others to ignore, obviously. And it was an adaptation, because Notre Dame, the Soul of France, was written for a British and American readership.
I would have guessed that it would have been the other. Like, part of me would have guessed that you would have put in more information for the Brits and the Americans and the Australians, because they know less, that the French would perhaps have in their sort of common knowledge when it comes to something like Notre Dame and history.
Well, you'd be surprised. The thing is, all the things we have forgotten as a nation, and therefore you need to say more.
Yeah, that's true.
Because it touches upon other related subjects, which those related subjects will be of no interest to the to the British or the Americans, but to the French you need to do all the connections.
On the other hand, it makes sense that the French one is longer, because often French people like to have long words for things we have short words for. They recently...
That's true, but...
They recently came up with a new French word for podcast. Yeah. Did you see that? It was like 6 words long.
Oh, it's not new.
What do
you mean balado-diffusion?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Well, I think that,
it's a bit...
Yes.
It's a bit of a mouthful,
yeah.
but...
Especially for a podcast. But I think the Académie Française put forward that word.
But
Can you say it again so I can learn it?
10 years... Yeah, it didn't catch up because it happened too late.
Say it again, though.
Balado-diffusion.
Balado-diffusion.
Yeah, as in ballad. Promenade.
Yeah.
Diffusion as in broadcast. But of course, they came up with the word far too late, so it didn't catch up.
Anyway.
Oh, well.
So, the book... It begins with sort of the night.
The night of the fire, yeah.
I love the way that you wrote it, and all the detail that you went into, the streets they took and stuff like that. Put me right there, took me right back. And then you go into history after that. But for you personally, your story is much better than mine. I was playing basketball when it happened, and by the time I finished my game, I looked at my phone, 1,000 messages, and I was like, what? It kind of, the drama had passed for me.
Right.
Because all the messages, as you scroll down, it looks like it's on fire, it's falling down, it's sort of going out, and then I came straight here.
Right.
So
what time was it when you arrived?
I played 7 till 9, so I must have got here 9:30 maybe.
Yeah.
So, and I was standing really close to where we are now, but they'd set up the big cordons, and it was still burning, but it was the moment had passed in a way. But for me, I was looking at people, and all, like, everything that people were understanding over the hours, I was understanding over the minutes. So it was quite weird. Like, for me, you mentioned it before, what it means to different people. For me, it's an architectural, the Pearl of Paris or whatever. beautiful architecture. And it didn't even occur to me, the religious part of it, until 3 minutes in or 4 minutes in, when I saw people weeping and praying and singing. It was very powerful. So I had this huge, it was, like all this information overload at once. And even weirder because that very day I'd done an episode about the Notre Dame. And the night before, for the first time, I'd watched The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the Disney movie. Yeah. So it was all happening at once for me. I was kind of spinning out a little bit. But I didn't have that story that you told in the book of yourself and so many other people of sort of running down here with smoke flying through the air.
Well, what I wanted to do was to meet all those different people, from the clergy, obviously, but also the art historians, the architects in chief, who all flocked to Notre Dame, and of course the man in charge, the architect in chief. There are 38 of them in France, in charge of the whole French heritage, as you call it, all the monuments of France. And there's a man in charge of Notre Dame, and he was in La Rochelle at the time. And so I wanted to interview them all, and to minute by minute,
I love it.
Say where they were. How they reacted, how they learnt about it, how they came by bike,
it was wonderful.
By tube, by TGV, by car,
what did they think when you were asking them? When you were like, so what street did you take? Were they like, why are you asking me what street I took? Because it came out really nicely, but it must have been an odd question for them to receive.
No, not really. So I they are all pieces of a jigsaw I wanted to put back in place, and that's why. I mean, the book has 12 chapters, I think, and the first one starts with that day, and the last chapter reprises, if you like, the narrative at 2 a.m. After we know that the structure is saved. And then the controversy about what we're going to do with the spire.
So that ambulance is going right past us, and now he's reversing towards us again. And usually, and yes, I take that kind of sound out, but I know a lot of people, it reminds them of their trip to Paris, so we'll be leaving it in.
Very good. So I end up talking about the future and the donators and the controversy about that spire, whether it will be reconstructed the way it was or not, and why not, etc. And between those two chapters, there are 10 key dates in the history of Notre Dame. They are short chapters, from the time it was built to the time, the 26th of August 1944, when Charles de Gaulle was almost assassinated.
It was sniping at him, right?
Yes, from within, from outside and within the cathedral, and we've got a live broadcast from it, because there was this Raymond Marcillac, was 27. It was his first assignment. Imagine that. Wow. Live broadcast. And he had huge equipment, not like your tiny recorder here. You can imagine, very heavy. And he had placed himself, he had arrived early, and he had placed his very heavy equipment on the upper gallery. And he was there, and, watching the thousands of people who were waiting for their liberator, because Charles de Gaulle had just marched from the Champs-Élysées to Notre Dame. And there were a lot of German snipers still in the city, and the American army was there, and the French second DB, as we call it, Général Leclerc. So Paris was being liberated. And he had planned to finish with a Magnificat Mass at Notre Dame, as we always do in our history. And we still don't know who those killers were, whether they were communists, whether they were German snipers or collaborateurs. But it started shooting. There were a few of them, a few shooters probably based around the towers, outside and inside. And of course then the Gaullists and the French resistance starting shooting back. And you can hear it. It's free, it's online.
I gotta watch that, I'll link to that.
And it is just extraordinary. And so Raymond Marcillac is just recording, is lying on his stomach near the killers and saying, General de Gaulle is entering the cathedral, and then you hear all this firing. And and I've also found testimonies of people who were there. A little girl who was 12 with her blind parent, imagine that, who really wanted to come to see and hear General de Gaulle. And there's this old spinster who is fantastic, and she had been waiting for 4 hours, because she wanted to see General de Gaulle. And they all tell that a few moments, and he could have been assassinated, there. And he walked tall. He was the only man, only person walking tall. Everybody was crouching and trying to find shelter behind the pillars.
Wonderful. What a story.
So anyway, there are plenty of stories like this.
And for people to read it, they'll have to look for the book Notre Dame, the Soul of France.
Yes.
Lovely cover as well, by the way. That picture's incredible.
The picture, it's an amateur photographer.
Really?
Yes. He went, how many kilometers away was he? He was on the roof of a building in Vincennes. So it's about, 6 kilometers from here.
Right, okay.
And he used the biggest possible lens zoom. And so it looks as if the Eiffel Tower is really near and so much bigger than Notre Dame. But it's not Photoshopped.
No.
It is.
Because when I first looked at it, I was like, that has to be Photoshopped. And then I thought, why would anyone use a Photoshopped picture like that? I figured it must be some kind of lens thing. It's incredible.
It sort
picture.
of flattens the perspective.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's also what I liked about this picture, that you have the Eiffel Tower almost looking after the old Notre Dame, the modernist and young Eiffel Tower.
The younger sister, perhaps.
Exactly, yeah. There's something very endearing about this picture.
Let's finish on the future, because I know you've got somewhere to be. But since the book was published very recently, they announced that they're going to redo the spire in the same style as was designed by one of my heroes,
Viollet-le-Duc.
I love. He's one of my favourites.
Well, he's my hero too.
Really?
Well, only since researching the book, because if you're French, generations, unless you're an art historian, but I'm not an art historian, nor am I an architect. So if you're just an average French person, you've been told to hate Viollet-le-Duc.
Really?
I remember my grandparents and my parents of Viollet-le-Duc. It's pastiche, medieval stuff. This is not the real thing.
Really?
And so and this is why it took so much flack. This is why also a lot of people said, no, we don't want Viollet-le-Duc, it's not the real stuff. And so I researched the guy. Yeah. And the guy is extraordinary. And he was an erudite, and he was a real lover of medieval architecture.
Right.
He's the real, he's the real thing.
He should be a celebrity. And I found out about him when I went to Carcassonne.
Of course.
And I was like, Carcassonne, whatever, amazing place, but what's the story? And I read the story, and I'm not going to go into it at all now, but he was the jigsaw master there, essentially. And then I found he'd done Notre Dame or the Spire, but not Saint-Malo or Saint-Michel, Mont-Saint-Michel he was involved in. But all these different, he was just involved in all these places and lived in, had a place in Paris and Pigalle. So when I heard that Spire was his work, I was like, yeah, great. And then when I heard they were redoing it, I thought, why not?
Yeah.
So my question, before I became a fan of Viollet-le-Duc there, is what's your reaction to the fact that they're going to be redoing it as it was?
Look, when do you remember those mad drawings, mad projects, mad schemes, with that? We'll do that spire in fiber, titanium, in aluminium, in diamond, in we'll have a torch, we'll have a swimming pool, we'll have a forest of wild animals there. I mean, it was fantastic. And I think, actually, I understand now, I think it was cathartic. Because of the trauma, we had to sort of get it off our chest and just be mad. But I must say, at the time, I thought, for a few seconds, I thought, 21st century genius added to the 12th century genius, why not?
Yeah.
then I thought, perhaps not. And then I interviewed so many art historians and architects. Not one of them advocated for anything new or anything daring or whatever. And because they knew of the genius of Viollet-le-Duc. I remember interviewing Rem Koolhaas, the great Dutch architect. And he said no. And that guy is really a modernist. He said no, Viollet-le-Duc, what he did was a masterpiece and could actually come from the 12th century. He's so faithful in spirit, but also what he did is just measures up to medieval master builders. So we must do exactly as he did. And they convinced me completely. And they convinced the French president. And they convinced everybody else. And so I think it's wise and great that they rebuilt it the way it was.
I think it'll take some time before it's back up again, but Notre Dame will rise again.
Yes, and that will be wonderful when it chimes again.
Yeah.
Because I really miss the bells. Because they used to ring, very often at every service, but not only. And living on the left bank without that beautiful sound is kind of sad.
Well, here's hoping it happens sooner rather than later. Thank you for sharing your time and your story.
Thank you for inviting me.
And, my pleasure. And really nice to meet you and to sit and have a coffee with you. But everybody, Notre Dame, the soul of France, I'll be talking about it in more depth soon. But wonderful. Thanks for being here.
Merci.
So there you go, there you have it. That was Agnes Poirier. As I said, it's the book club book. You can find more information about how to join the book club and get the book and everything on theeiffeltower.com. In fact, as I think about the Notre Dame, and before we get into the mayor here, I've done a couple of podcast interviews about the cathedral. I've done a bunch of videos before it burned. I was in there on a special invitation from Secret Journeys at night. Walking around on the inside of it when it was totally empty. I made a little video about that like a year and a half ago. I'll embed that too. And my idea, just to make it really easy, go to theeiffeltower.com/Notre Dame. One word, I'll put everything on that same page. Nice and easy to find. But as for this chat with Monsieur le Maire, Ariel Weil, we recorded this in mid-May. So if he says 1 week ago or anything like that, you can place it in time. But since we had that conversation, they've announced that they are going to rebuild the spire in the style of Viollet-le-Duc, so it'll look exactly the same. And if you were to go and visit the cathedral today, you would be able to get into the crypt out the front that the mayor talks about here, and you are able to walk over half of the parvis, or the big square out the front. If you're to walk around the cathedral, you'll see they've got lots of pictures still up explaining the work that's going on, and you can see that they're working up there on the scaffolding, preparing for the actual renovation job. There you go. So here's what happened when I chatted with the mayor. I'll be back after this again with a little bit more. Can you give us an update on exactly where we are with the Notre Dame Cathedral?
Well, it's a big topic, but what I can tell you is, as far as the latest update, is that they've resumed work on the construction site, which they had stopped right at the beginning of the lockdown. They'd stopped doing any work there, other than work that could be done remotely, such as studying and seeing what the phasing for the rest of the work. But they had stopped doing any work on the construction site. So for sure they're late. Now, when I say they're late, the timeline has always been quite blurred and confused, right? It has changed so many times from the beginning. I keep saying those two things that, we said how the president said that it would be rebuilt in 5 years. Mm-hmm. I've never really been sure what that meant because, when there are two questions that would never really answered. The first is, when does the time start ticking, right? Because from a perspective, the 5 years, you could argue those 5 years haven't started, right?
Yeah.
If the 5 years are for the reconstruction, well, the reconstruction property hasn't started. We're still in the phase that's called the securitization phase. They're still preparing the work for the reconstruction, right? Now they still have to remove the big all that was prepared for the repairs, the renovation before.
The scaffolding, they have to get rid of that.
Wait, the scaffolding has to be taken down. You can still see that. That's the elephant in the room, right? The scaffolding has to be taken down. And until that is done, you could say that the reconstruction hasn't started properly, right? So that's the first question. The second question is, what exactly is being reconstructed now? And that question hasn't been decided upon, although, to be honest, I think we all know it's going to be reconstructed as it was. I think we all know that, at least for the roof. As at least my opinion is that's how it should be done. I think that's now a big consensus. But there hasn't been a formal decision by the president of the government as to what is the objective. So we're not sure that the reconstruction started, and we're not sure what is the objective. That's those are two big questions. What is sure is that there are a lot of things that need to be done before reconstruction starts. I'm glad that they've returned to work as long as they can do it. And so I actually got a call from General Georgelin, who's now piloting the special body in charge of the reconstruction, obviously working hand in hand with the city. And I got a call from him telling me that they were stopping the work. And then I got a call when they restarted, and we discussed a little bit of that. But as you know, my team is part of the weekly discussion on how things are done. And one of the intermediary steps that I'm looking forward to is when we reopen the plaza in front of the porch of Notre Dame, right? Partially, obviously, part of it is going to remain within the construction site, but part of it is going to be regained for inhabitants and everyone, and that's going to be nice because that commands people being safer. Right now, it'll be very nice because it will give people more breathing space, and we need that. And finally, it also would allow access to the crypt that's underneath, right? Yeah. So it's not going to open tomorrow, but I hope that sometimes over the summer or by the fall for sure, we can reopen the crypt and make it a nice place for people to visit with these exhibitions about Notre Dame. Everything's ready. Now we just need to gain access to the front of Notre Dame.
Okay, I hate to put you on the spot, but you disagree with the president's 5 years. Like, how long do you think it will be before we're back in there as normal?
No, I don't disagree, and I don't mean to I do mean to challenge a little bit, right? I don't disagree that we can do something in 5 years, but I've from the beginning have never thought that it could be completely reconstructed. I think at this point I've never thought that it could be, and I still think that now it's crazy. It won't be reconstructed in 5 years. That's for sure. I mean, now it's 4.5. It's less than 4 years now, right? If we start from the night when it burned down, there's no way, right? We have less than 4 years. It won't be reconstructed. Now, I do think, and I think that's a nice objective. That's why I'm not being sarcastic about it. I think it is nice to have an objective. It is nice to be aiming at having something done by 2024. But I think we have to be realistic about it. I hope we have the roof reconstructed in 4 years. I think that probably can be done. I'm not even sure that can be done, but I think that's the max that you can do. And if we do that and we allow people back in 4 years, that will be great. Now, if we need another 5 years or 10 years to reconstruct the spire and do and finish the work, then so be it. That has always been like that. Notre Dame was built over more than a century, and it was constantly fixed and rebuilt. And the spire that went down, as you know, was only, if I can say that, was only 160 or 170 years old when it went down. It was beautiful. I want it to be reconstructed. I think it should be reconstructed as it was. But there were times when Notre Dame didn't have any spire, and times when it had a different one. So I think it's a living building. It's a living monument. And we have to admit that. And so in 5 years or 4 years now, Doug has been ticking. in 4 years, I think we can, and I hope we do, have a roof and can allow people back in. But I can tell you, it won't be finished, and I think that's fine.
And there you have it. Monsieur le Maire, Ariel Weil, friend of the show. We've done a bunch of videos and episodes together. And as I said, he's now the mayor of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th districts. Paris Centre, they did a big election, and they administratively, at least, decided to blend those 4 districts into one. If that confuses you, let me just clear it up. There are still 4 districts. They just have one mayor now. But there you go. Look, so I said I'd read some emails and stuff. I'm very aware that this episode's a bit longer, so I'll keep it short. Instead of reading through reviews or emails or anything, I'll talk about something that's going on behind the scenes, which is always fun. If you're new around here, you might not know that this podcast has seasons. But it's just like a TV. It's like Seinfeld or Friends. The seasons don't really mean that much, except that I tweak it a little bit as I go along. And we're almost up to season 9. I think it's about time to get on with it from this season 8, which has kind of been a lockdown season. And the question is, when I get to season 9, do I continue with the interrupted season 7, which was going through all the arrondissements of Paris in order? Do I start with something new, or do I kind of restart the arrondissement episodes and do them bigger and better, like the one that I did for the 8th arrondissement, where I went there and I recorded it on the go and visited all like La Durée and all that kind of stuff. The one that was recommended by the New York Times. Do I do that for the whole city? I don't know. So I put the question to the Patreon members. In other words, the members of this show who have subscribed and pay a membership fee. And I said, what do you want? What's your favorite episode? What do you want more of? And looking through it now, 78 responses. And loads of good ideas. So if you want to have an idea, if you want to contribute to the show in a way that's more than just passively listening to it, get in there, make a comment, help me shape the future of the show. And instead of reading any of them out, I'll sort of go by the general consensus. The members really wanted the episodes to continue with that arrondissement by arrondissement style. So I know that you guys like it. I know that you want it, and I will make it happen. The question is just whether I start at the start again, or whether I continue from number 12. That's what I'll be thinking about while I enjoy the rest of my holiday. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Eiffel Tower. If you did, the good news is there's 217 other episodes kind of like it in the back pages. Go and check them out. If you really like the episode, sign up on patreon.com/the Eiffel Tower and help me make this show better. Otherwise, have a lovely week wherever you are, and I'll see you again for another episode next Monday as usual. Merci beaucoup, au revoir, and have a lovely week.
I don't really know where we are. I just wanna look at the stars.